U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has held phone calls with each of Sudan's warring generals, urging them to reach a ceasefire to end days of bloodshed. Both groups have been fighting for control of Sudan since Saturday. The UN says that at least 185 people have been killed. In Japan, for a G7 foreign ministers meeting, Blinken decried a Monday attack on a U.S. diplomatic convoy in Sudan as reckless and irresponsible, and warned that such violence threatens the delivery of foreign aid.
We have deep concerns, of course, about the overall security environment as it affects civilians, as it affects diplomats, as it affects aid workers. World Food Program had to suspend its operations. 3 of its people were killed. That potentially has terrible consequences for the Sudanese people, who are in desperate need of the assistance provided by the World Food Program.
And other foreign representatives in Sudan have also been caught up in the violence. The EU reported that its ambassador to Sudan was assaulted at his home in Khartoum. The fighting has made it impossible to determine an overall death toll, with many bodies still left in the streets, as it is too dangerous to recover them. Those who decide to leave their homes are taking a deadly risk.
Fleeing the fighting in the streets of Khartoum. Those who can are getting out.
We are leaving the city and heading for our hometown. We are waiting for the victory statement from the Sudanese army.
Others have had no choice but to stay put. Trapped by the fighting, these university students are sheltering in their college library. And homes are no longer safe. The conflict has seen heavy gunfire and several airstrikes in civilian neighborhoods. The EU's ambassador to Sudan was assaulted in his home in Khartoum, the bloc's top diplomat Josep Borrell said in a tweet. The violence has left the city's airport, hospitals and top military buildings badly scarred. The clashes are an eruption of a long simmering power struggle between Sudan's army and the powerful paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. They joined forces to oust former dictator Omar al-Bashir in 2019. Now they have turned their guns on each other, just months after signing a deal to restore civilian rule.
To be very honest, the two sides who are fighting are not giving the impression that they want mediation for a peace between them right away. Rather, they are calling on the other side the other side to give up or to surrender, or the other side to be disbanded.
Global and regional leaders have called on the warring parties to accept a ceasefire. But with neither the RSF or the army willing to back down, the deadly violence looks set to continue.
And I spoke earlier with Murithi Mutiga, Africa Program Director at the International Crisis Group. I asked him what really worried him about the situation in Sudan right now.
I think what's very worrying is that we have accelerated to the worst-case scenario right from the start. This is a battle between 2 very well-armed, very motivated sides, and it's taking place in the heart of a capital of nearly 6 million people. It's the height of Ramadan, 40-degree heat, electricity cut off in many neighborhoods. You don't have water flowing. So it's a real humanitarian catastrophe with the potential to get worse because of the capacity and motivation of both sides.
Walk us through a little bit more about what is happening indeed on the humanitarian level and what it means for Sudan's civilian population in particular. Access, as you've mentioned, to things like essentials, food, water, medicine.
So Sudan is a country that has witnessed instability almost right from independence in 1956. But this is the first time we are seeing street-to-street fighting in the capital. In the past, we've seen multiple coups. It's the most coup-prone country in Africa. But today now we see this huge metropolis with people running out of electricity. You can imagine it's the height of summer, very, very hot. This makes people very vulnerable, especially the older population. And you're seeing the hospitals running out of supplies. In a few cases, they've been directly targeted. We've heard from the WHO that some hospitals have been targeted. The World Food Programme has suspended its operations. And we have to note that while we have some sight on what's happening in Khartoum, we don't know exactly what's happening elsewhere. There's been fighting in multiple settings in Eastern Sudan, in Gedaref, in Kordofan, in Darfur. And really, this is really, really worrying. It's very essential that a ceasefire is agreed, even if only a humanitarian ceasefire soon.
We heard a little bit earlier in the program that U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has held phone calls with each of Sudan's warring generals. Tell us a little bit more about how effective you think that pressure might be and whether any sort of international intervention might help.
So Sudan is a hugely significant country. It basically sits at the crossroads between the Middle East, North Africa, the Sahel, and the Horn of Africa. It's a very, very large country. It's a very important country surrounded by fairly unstable hotspots. And so I think that there will be substantial interest in trying to get the various actors to pull back. I think it will need to be concerted mediation. It will need to involve the African Union, the regional bloc, IGAD, important neighbors such as Egypt, but also those further afield such as Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and the Qataris, who all have influence with some of the actors. And the Americans are really critical because they are historically important security partners, both for the various security actors and also the political players. I think hopefully that there will be also some internal efforts at mediation. But as you heard up top, I think unfortunately for the moment, both sides seem confident. Both sides seem willing to try and secure military victory, and that's a very worrying sign for the Sudanese population.
We've also heard reported the EU's ambassador to Sudan was assaulted in his home in Khartoum, and I'm just wondering what you thought when you heard that news. And is it also fair to assume now, as you've mentioned between these warring generals, that Sudan's transition to democracy is effectively now dead?
So when we look back at April 2019, I think what basically we have to accept is that the security forces, even if they seized power and handed over to a civilian prime minister, never really accepted to step back. This is a country which has been ruled on and off by the military for most of the years of independence. They have controlled power, but especially the economy for a long time. They never really anticipated handing over to civilians. But at the same time, I think they have to remember that this is a complex country that they can't just rule unilaterally. The EU is an important partner. I don't think this from what we've had, appears to have been targeted. I think it's part of the disorder unfolding within the capital. But the EU, the US, the Gulf partners, the African partners, all need to impress upon the actors that none of them will be able to rule the country unilaterally. It's a broad, it's a large, it's a very diverse country. They all have to accept that the civilians will need to play a role. I think the civilians also need to be, very careful how they approach this and how they especially urge all sides equally to step back, agree to come back to a framework agreement. I don't really think it's a hopeless situation. It's a very terrifying and worrying one, but potentially, if all sides can understand none can prevail militarily, we can go back to some sort of negotiations about a framework agreement that allows the civilians to take the lead.
Murithi Mutiga from the International Crisis Group, thank you so much.